All right, ladies and gentlemen, you are locked on Falcons. I'm your host, Aaron Freeman, and today we're reviewing the All 22 film from the Falcons' Week 16 win over the Detroit Lions, talking about their conservative defensive game plan and whether that informs us about what are their priority positions that they need to upgrade on that side of the ball this offseason.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
So, guys, you know me. I'm Aaron Freeman. Been covering the Falcons for many years, formerly at falcfans.com. RIP, still going strong on Twitter at FalcFans. And, of course, the host of this world-renowned Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Falcons is our usual Wednesday show, which is going to be an all 22 review of the most recent Falcons game, this one being a Week 16 win over the Detroit Lions. Normally, we would also have some mailbag questions for you, for me to answer, but today I'm taking a break from the mailbag. I know some of you guys have some lingering questions. We'll potentially get to them at a later date, potentially later this week on Friday. But I really wanted to talk about a couple of topics because watching the film, what jumped out to me was how conservative the Falcons' defensive game plan was when I sat down and charted this defense in terms of their coverages and their lack of blitzes and whatnot. And that's been a trend over the last couple of weeks. And we'll talk about that and how this Lions game fits into the recent trend with the Falcons being more zone heavy. Then that will lead us into a conversation about, okay, if the Falcons are going to play this zone heavy type of defense, does that mean, or does that really inform us on what their priorities could or should be this offseason when it comes to upgrading this defense? And maybe there's a particular position group in the secondary where one position gets a lot of the attention, but maybe really need to be focusing on that other position. And I'm talking about, spoiler alert, safety, maybe needing a little bit more focus than corner. And then we'll wrap up today's episode by getting into the revisiting the talent narrative, because again, watching the film of this game, just reminded me something I brought up a little bit on Sunday's post-game rapid reaction show, that there is a real talent disparity between where the Falcons are and where the Lions are. And, we really need to frame the conversation, particularly when it comes to Arthur Smith and how good a job he's done coaching, differently than, oh, he's won a bunch of games despite the fact that the Falcons have no talent. That's not really where the conversation should be. And I'll give you a reason why you can sit here and say, hey, Arthur Smith's actually done a pretty decent job based off of these things, but it's not in the way that a lot of people frame it. So we'll get to that later on today's episode. But before we get there, guys, I want to thank you for making Locked On Falcons your first listen each and every day. Of course, Locked On Falcons is free, available on a variety of podcast platforms, including Apple, Odyssey, Google, and Spotify. And of course, now Locked On Falcons is free and available on YouTube. So make sure you subscribe to the Locked On Falcons YouTube channel. And when you do, give us that thumbs up, as well as leave any comments that you have. So let's jump into the first topic of today, and that's the Falcons' conservative game plan. And it was oddly conservative against this Lions team. And we've seen over the last 3 weeks, the Falcons have been, sort of dialing up a lot more zone heavy defensive approach. And it's probably not a coincidence that those are the 3 games that Eric Harris has missed, although I'm a little surprised that the Falcons have taken that choice. And it's certainly a choice. I tend to give Dean Pease the benefit of the doubt with the various choices that he makes, because he has forgotten more about the game of football than I will probably ever know. But I feel like when we've talked about the defensive improvement that really started in that Patriots game a couple of weeks ago, and if you exclude the Bucs game out of the conversation, we've seen the Falcons defense kind of play much better over the last 4 to 6 weeks, generally speaking. And it seems like that's coincided with the Falcons taking a much more man heavy approach. So to see them go back to zone as they have done the last 3 games, including this Lions game, is a bit of a question mark for me. The last 3 weeks they've played over 70% of their defensive snaps, or at least on passing downs, um, in zone coverage based off of my charting, which is something that they pretty consistently did over the first 8 or so weeks of the season, most weeks. And, that was a choice that I, don't really have a beef with, because you got to play zone certain amount. Even the most man heavy team is still playing zone probably 50-60% of the time. So 70% isn't like this huge number, but since week 9, that number was deploying, zone maybe closer to 50% than the first couple of games. And it kind of started in that week 9 game against the Saints, where the Falcons went more to a man heavy scheme, and that seemed to be related to the fact that the Saints, who have one of the worst groups of wide receivers in the NFL, or the worst group in wide receivers, contrary to the opinion of a lot of Falcon fans that think the Falcons do, but the Saints, who have the worst group of receivers in the league, the Falcons felt that they could man up that team, and it made sense for them. And you would assume, given that the Lions are probably the second worst group of receivers in the NFL, outside of Amon-Ra St. Brown, that you would assume that they would have gone with a man-heavy approach, because they felt confident that they could man up this group of receivers. And given that the Saints, or the Lions, like the Saints, were dealing with a backup quarterback in Tim Boyle, like the Saints were with Trevor Siemian back then, one of the reasons why you like man coverage is, theoretically at least, it doesn't always work out in reality, but theoretically, because of the tight coverage that you're typically getting versus zone, where there's potentially these wide open spaces where you can throw into, the windows are smaller. And it forces particularly lesser quarterbacks, it gives them more problems, because they have to fit the ball into tighter windows. And that's where, being a high level quarterback that has that level of accuracy becomes important. And we saw this, going back, to 2019, with that defensive turnaround in the second half of the season, with the Falcons taking that man heavy approach against quarterbacks like Kyle Allen and Gardner Minshew. We've seen that against Simeon. We've seen against Trevor Lawrence. Another guy that struggled this season, Cam Newton, and PJ Walker in week 14 also struggled against all of these guys. And now Tim Boyle. All those guys had a lower, than 50% completion rate when the Falcons deployed man coverage in those respective games. Tim Boyle only completed about 33% of his passes against the Falcons man coverage. The Lions' success rate against the Falcons man coverage was 22%, which is one of the lowest rates the Falcons have produced all season long. But they only managed to use man coverage on about 26% of their plays. And during that week 9 to week 13 stretch, where it was primarily man coverage, or at least more man coverage than it was earlier in the season, they were ranging between 40 and 60%, as I said earlier. And so the Falcons went zone heavy against the Lions, and particularly cover 2 heavy this week. And you go back to that week 14 game against Carolina, they went cover 2 heavy that week. But you could argue, particularly in the second half, where I think 86% of their second half snaps deployed zone defense. And you could make the argument in week 14, but because the Falcons had a lead, that it made sense to play a little bit more zone to protect that lead. But this week, when it was kind of a back and forth game, the Falcons playing, zone defense on 75% of their second half snaps, particularly given how effective their man coverage was in the first half, seemed to be being conservative for the sake of being conservative. And the other thing that I noted watching the game was how very little the Falcons blitzed in this game. Based off my charting, I only charted 4 blitzes on 34 dropbacks by Tim Boyle this week. PFF only charted 2. The 4 I counted, 3 of those 4 were 4-man blitz concepts. The Falcons sent 5 guys only one time in this game. They actually sent 3 guys. I had a 3-man rush twice in this game. So basically over 90% of the snaps, the Falcons just rush 4, either a standard way or with, a blitz and replace concept. And we know how hard it has been for this Falcon team to get pressure with, a standard 4-man rush. And that's one of the reasons why they have tried to dial up pressure. The Panthers, again, a game where the Falcons featured a lot of zone, did dial up a lot more 4, 5, and 6-man blitz concepts. I charted 75%, or at least on those plays where they dialed up that type of pressure, they were able to get some form of pressure based off my charting on 75% of those plays. They blitzed 16 times, or on 43% of the Panthers dropbacks in that game. They dialed back the blitz against the 49ers the following week. Again, another zone heavy approach for the game plan. They only blitzed 7 times, which is still 29% of the 49ers dropbacks. They were less effective at getting home, only getting some form of pressure on about 2 out of those 7, or 29% again. And but that still was faring much better than when the Falcons just had a sort of standard 4-man rush, because I counted that they got some form of pressure on only 1 out of the 17 times they brought a standard 4-man rush, or 6% of the time. And if you're curious on those standard 4-man rushes, this time the Falcons got pressure against the Lions 23% of those plays. And on the 4 plays where they did bring some form of blitz, they were able to get some form of pressure on 75%, or 3 out of those plays. So, 23% pressure on a standard 4-man rush is better than what the Falcons have typically done in most games this year. It's one of the better days that they've had rushing the quarterback. So, that was a testament to the Lions not necessarily having a great offensive line there, and the Falcons being able to find ways to get effective pressure, more effective than they have shown to date. But we've talked about before on this podcast that the sort of typical number that you're looking for in order to say that you had an effective pass rush is around 35%. And the difference between, 35 and 23%, would be roughly about 3 or so plays, based off of how many dropbacks the Lions had. And, you can make the argument then that basically the Falcons finding a pass rusher that could add another 3 pressures per game, or roughly 50 over the course of an entire season, would be greatly beneficial to getting this pass rush to at least league average levels. So it's not as if the Falcons have a huge way to go in that regard. If you could reliably get, 23%, which they haven't been able to reliably get, as I said, against the 49ers, it was 6%. So that's a longer way to go. But it is one of those things where, like, in these games, the Falcons aren't super far, at least if you can get what they did against the Lions more consistently week in and week out. And that's going to lead us kind of into our next conversation, which is talking about what this defense needs to address this offseason, using this Lions game as the basis for judgment. And we'll get into that as we continue today's Locked On Falcons podcast, guys. But we got to talk about how it's the end of the calendar year of 2021. 2022 is right around the corner. You're coming up with your New Year's resolutions. A lot of you want to eat healthier, and you've heard me for months talk about Built Bars, the best tasting protein bar in the market. They taste just like a candy bar, covered in chocolate, but they're healthy too, low in sugar and carbs and calories and fat, but high in protein and fiber. You get the best of both worlds, delicious and healthy. But you don't need to hear that spiel again, because really it's about the new year, and Built Bar knows this, and they're having a 22% off sale on everything that you can find at built.com. That's the Built Bars, that's the Built Bites, which is the bite-sized version of the Built Bars. That's Built Broth if you want, more protein in your standard chicken broth or beef broth. Built Broth is for you. If you want Built Boost and you want to get your vitamins and an immunity boost that you can add to your drinks or whatever, that's where the Built Boost comes in. All of that is 22% off right now at built.com. So those are going to be through the new year, as long as supplies last. And on top of that, you're also still getting the 15% discount if you use the promo code LOCKED15 when you order one of those items, whatever you want, at built.com. Again, that's promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off whatever you order, in addition to the 22% that you're getting off. So if you have been on the fence about trying Built Bars or whatever the case may be at built.com, now is the time to do so, because they're giving you all the incentive to do so. And if you've been a convert over the last year plus that we've been, promoting Built and Built Bars on this podcast, by all means, now is the time to go and clean out their inventory, because you're getting as big a discount as you possibly can get. So if you're a convert, you know how good Built Bar is. By all means, share the wealth, promote it yourself, spread the gospel to all the folks. So again, 22% off all items at built.com while supplies last through the new year. And then on top of that, the promo code LOCKED15 for an additional 15% off. So go check it out at built.com. So we're talking about the Lions Falcons game and what I saw in the film, and we just kind of wrapped up about the Falcons' inability to get pressure on the team. We know that's going to be the priority number one when it comes to this offseason and addressing this defense. Again, the choice to deploy more zone and especially more cover two in this Lions game specifically was an interesting choice, given that the cover two has been so problematic for the Falcons this year. We talked about this back in week 2 after the Bucks game, where the Falcons got gashed a bunch with the cover two, and that has continued throughout the season. I haven't charted every single snap yet. I still got to go back and chart some plays from those Dolphin and Jets wins, but at least from week 9 on, when I've charted how many 20 plus yard plays the Falcons have given up this year, they've given up 6 20 plus yard plays when they deploy cover one, 6 when they've deployed cover three, but 14 when they've deployed cover two. And if you want to see the percentages of that, based off of the number of snaps that they've played in each of those coverages, that's 5% of their man coverage plays in that cover one over the last 8 games have resulted in big plays. That's 7% of their cover three. And most of that came in against the 49ers, where they carved them up when they deployed cover three. And then, of course, Kyle Shanahan, his offense is designed to carve up cover three. But that's 15% of their plays. So more than double that number when it's come to cover two. And this has been a problem for the Falcons all year long. So the choice of the last couple of weeks, especially to play as much cover two as the Falcons have played, seems like a questionable choice, given how the Falcons have been so good at not giving up big plays this year. That's one of the one areas that you can sit here and say this Dean Pease defense is better than his predecessors under Dan Quinn and Raheem Morris, is not giving up the big plays. I'm sure some of you have already seen the graphic out there on Twitter and elsewhere that says the Falcons are the only defense in the NFL this year to not give up a 40 plus yard play this season. And they're about league average and slightly above league average when you factor in the number of overall plays when it comes to 20 plus yard plays given up this year. So they've been an above averaging 13th in terms of, when you factor in the number of snaps that they've played in terms of giving up those 20 plus yard plays. So they've been pretty solid in that regard. And so when we're talking about them playing cover two, that's been the one coverage that they've been most vulnerable, giving up those big plays this season. And we can speculate as to why the team tends to give up more big plays in cover two. And you can make the argument, and again, I'm not going to necessarily die on this hill right now, but certainly you can make a decent argument that it's because this personnel was built to be more of that middle field closed coverages, which is the cover one and the cover three. And that's why this team seems to be more comfortable playing that style, because that's what Dan Quinn and Raheem Morris were deploying primarily over the last 5-6 years. So that's certainly an argument that we can make. Some of it again is owed to the absence of Eric Harris, and you can certainly make the argument that maybe Dean Pease feels like the cover two is a better fit for Jalen Hawkins' skill set versus Eric Harris's skill set. And I don't think that's a wrong or crazy conclusion to come to. We may talk about that a little bit later in the episode. But one of the downsides of playing as much cover two, and this was also true of Raheem Morris when he was here and he was running the various schemes, and it's been generally the case this year. Again, I'd have to double check the numbers to see how true it is. But generally speaking, when the Falcons play their zone, they're not dialing them as much blitzes playing cover two versus cover three. The cover two is typically relying a little bit more on a standard 4-man rush under Dean Pease. This was also the case under Raheem Morris than the cover three, where they tend to be a little bit more aggressive, bringing pressure from the linebacker or corner, particularly with those 4 and 5 man concepts. And talked about this before in the podcast that Raheem Morris was a little bit more aggressive, bringing those 4 and 5 man and even 6 man pressure concepts out of zone, particularly once he took over as the interim head coach in 2020 than Dan Quinn was, and certainly has been more so than Dean Pease has been this year. But I argued in the past on this podcast that part of that is owed to the fact that Raheem Morris had a as crazy as it sounds to say, a Dirk Cutter led offense that was better than the current Arthur Smith led offense, at least in terms of generating explosive plays, generating points and whatnot. And so Raheem Morris didn't have to feel as compelled. Like, he could be more aggressive because he had a lot more confidence that his offense, if the defense screwed up, the offense could get those points back, right? They could go down the field and score. And given how unexplosive this Arthur Smith offense has been, how inefficient has been in recent weeks, not necessarily against the Lions, but in the red zone, and not being able to drive the ball the length of the field as readily as the Dirk Cutter team, Dean Pease can't really afford to do that, because every mistake that the defense makes is not a mistake that the offense is going to be able to make up for, which only exacerbates those mistakes. So it's part of the reason why you would assume that Dean Pease would gear his defense towards not minimizing mistakes. And so therefore, again, going back to why are they deploying as much cover two as they are in recent weeks. But I think part of the reason why Dean Pease seems to be going in this direction is that you're seeing this recent trend in the NFL of going from middle of the field close coverages, which is the cover one and cover three, where you have that single. What that means is the middle of the field is closed because there's a safety there, that single high safety, to middle of the field open coverages. And last year was the first year, really, since the Seahawks defense took the league by storm back in 2013, where you saw teams, the majority of snaps in the NFL being middle of the field open, or those split safety coverages, which is primarily cover two and cover three, or I'm sorry, cover two and cover four, right? And so one of the reasons maybe why Dean Pease is deploying that as his quote unquote default, as it appears to be, this is basically the argument I'm making based off of this Lions game and the recent decision to play that, despite all the reasons not to play that I've outlined. Dean Pease is going with the flow, right? He's going with the trend of the league, and it makes sense for that. And we can talk about how deploying those coverages, those middle of the field open coverages, those split safety coverages, affects how you change your defensive front, because you're going to generally have lighter boxes than you would if you deployed a cover three, where you could drop that safety down, that strong safety, the Keanu Neal type, the Cam Chancellor type, into the box more easily as an eighth defender in the box. And if you're going to play the split safety, you're pretty much always going to have 7-man boxes for the most part, and that changes how your defensive front has to play. And we can have a conversation of that, but we're not going to have that conversation on today's episode. We'll punt that to the offseason and potentially bring on some potential guests that can explore that more deeply. But what this really means is that maybe the safety position is a more significant need than the other positions on defense besides the pass rush. And you've heard me say on the podcast that I think the three biggest positional upgrades the Falcons need in no particular order is left guard, edge rusher, primarily providing that juice as a pass rusher, and adding a playmaker in the secondary. And I've been purposely vague about not picking a specific secondary position, whether that's free safety, strong safety, corner, nickel corner, etc., because I think what that position is heavily dependent on what type of scheme the Falcons want to be. And it's hard to tell what exactly Dean Pease wants to be based off of his historic trends of basically tailoring his defense to his players' strengths. And the point I'm trying to make is, like, the fact that the Falcons were so conservative against the Lions and have gone back to being that cover two team may mean that this is kind of the default. That's his tendency, that he wants to be this type of defense. And so, if we were playing more of that man heavy cover one style of defense, like Wink Martindale does in Baltimore, you would probably want a big time press man outside corner to be that extra playmaker in the secondary. And so if, to find the Marcus Peters to AJ Terrell's Marlon Humphrey, or, the Marlon Humphrey to AJ Terrell's Marcus Peters, or whatever the case may be, if you were a Seahawks style defense, playing more of that cover three zone defense, you probably want a ball hawking single high safety that could come in and play that position at a high level, a Justin Simmons type, or obviously Earl Thomas is the sort of the template for that, but Earl Thomases don't grow on trees. But in a split safety defense, you kind of want a jack of all trades type of safety, and we kind of thought Richie Grant would be that type of player. So far, he's been unproven in that regard. I'm not writing him off by any means, but I'm also not assuming right now, given that we haven't seen it from him so far that he's that type of guy. Deron Harmon has not really been that type of player for the Falcons this season. His experience is more as that single high type of guy, and he has not really done a great job in terms of the split safeties. Again, going back to the point earlier about Jalen Hawkins being maybe a better fit, you kind of saw this in the Panthers game on that one play where he was being able to come down, not only playing the deep half of the field, but also that's what you kind of want in a split safety. Like you want the range of a deep safety, but you don't necessarily need it to the same degree that you would need for a single high cover three safety, but you want some of that. And you also need that guy to be able to come underneath, and attack the intermediate level of the field, particularly as a run defender, as well as breaking up some of those throws over the middle of the field where the cover two tends to funnel the football. And you saw that with Jalen Hawkins in the Panthers game. That hit that he delivered on Robbie Anderson is exactly what we're talking about, what you want to see more of from the safety group. You're not seeing from Deron Harmon. Obviously, Richie Grant, we don't know what he is in that regard. And so adding another safety that can do more of that on a regular basis could potentially be the biggest priority outside of adding to the pass rush on the defensive side of the ball, if this is how Team Pease wants to play it. So, we'll sort of see whether or not there are options in free agency in the draft. We're not going to get into specifics right now. That's something that we can do in the offseason. But essentially, we're looking for, if it's a draft pick, we're looking for Antoine Winfield Jr. 2.0. And if it's a free agent, we're looking for John Johnson, because that's basically what John Johnson did with the Rams and what the Browns paid him a lot of money to do this past offseason. So again, Richie Grant could be that guy that can maybe potentially tag team with Jalen Hawkins if Richie Grant can make that year or two jump. But at this point in time, we don't know. So that's just something to keep an eye on, something to, put in your pipe and smoke it, as far as when we talk about what the Falcons may need this offseason. We may be having a conversation that maybe safety is a bigger priority after the pass rush, or at least on the defensive side of the ball, than anything else. So that's where we'll leave that conversation, and we'll wrap up today's episode by revisiting the lack of talent conversation after rewatching the film of this Falcons Lions game, and talking about something I talked about on the Sunday post-game rapid reaction, talking a little bit about the talent disparity between the Falcons and Lions. And that's why you hear so much pushback from me about the Falcons, at least the narrative that the Falcons lack talent. And, it leads me to spending a lot of time being a little bit more critical of Arthur Smith than other people are. But I think there's reasons, and we'll get into some reasons, that if you want to be praising, or reasons why I should be a little bit more praising of Arthur Smith, I think that is really where we need to be starting to have this conversation. We'll get into that as we continue today's episode. But once again, I want to thank you guys for making Locked On Falcons your first listen each and every day. And of course, I always have recommendations for what your second listen should be. And of course, given what's at stake this potential weekend, why not check out the Locked On Bulldogs podcast? It's got you covered for all things when it comes to the Georgia Bulldogs side of the college playoff upcoming this weekend. So go check out Locked On Bulldogs. Of course, it's free and available on the same platforms that you can find Locked On Falcons, including on YouTube. And, what's also free and available on a variety of podcast platforms, the same ones that you can find Locked On Falcons, is, of course, the ultimate college football playoff preview 2021, which is part of the same feed that if you checked out the NFL preview, several months ago, back in August and early September, it's on that same feed. They recycle the feed for all the big sort of network wide events. So you might as well stay subscribed to it for all those big events. So if you're subscribed to that already, you already got it. If you're not subscribed to it already, you can just go to your favorite podcast platform and search Ultimate College Football Playoff Preview 2021. And of course, you're getting updates that has been going on since Friday, and they'll be going on all week long. You've gotten Sugar Bowl previews and Fiesta Bowl previews, Rose Bowl previews already up on the feed. You got more coming in the coming days. You're getting betting advice. You're getting insight from the Locked On local experts for the respective teams in a lot of these games. So definitely check out the Ultimate College Football Playoff Preview. So wrapping up today's Locked On Falcons, let's talk once again about the Falcons' quote unquote talent issue. And you hear this narrative, and even our good friend Mike Rothstein of ESPN on yesterday's episode expressed this narrative, which I disagree with. All respect due to Mike, and all respect due to anybody else who expresses this narrative. But I'm going to continue to die on this hill. I think it's BS, right? This narrative that the Falcons have one of the worst rosters in the NFL. And so, therefore, it's a testament to how great a job Arthur Smith has done to get this team with this talent level to 7 wins. So much so that a couple of weeks ago, some people were talking about, hey, maybe he should be considered for coach of the year, which, again, crazy. And again, I'll stress this when we talk about lack of talent on the Falcons roster. If we're talking about the defensive side of the ball, oh, absolutely. You're not going to hear a peep out of me arguing against that. Yeah, the defense does legitimately lack talent. And, we talked about some of the reasons why that is, but they have, a lot of day 3 talents in terms of the draft and undrafted free agents playing prominent roles across this defense. You look at the defensive front. You got Mike Pennell, Anthony Rush, Steven Means, Brandon Copeland, all former undrafted free agents that are playing prominent snaps for this team. You got Eric Harris, formerly before he got injured, playing prominent roles in the secondary, and arguably besides AJ Terrell, the most consistent secondary player. And you got day 3 talents like Adi Ogundeji, Taquan Graham, Michael Walker, Jalen Hawkins, Avery Williams, Darren Hall, also playing significant roles. I know Foye Oluokun and Grady Jarrett were also drafted on day 3, but we know they outperformed that status, so I don't necessarily call them day 3 talents. They've performed like day 2 talents that were drafted in day 3. So when it comes to the Falcons defense, absolutely, talent is an issue. That unit needs a huge infusion of talent on that side of the ball. But when it comes to the offense, like, you can't make that same claim, and that's certainly the side of the ball that is directly under the purview of Arthur Smith, given that he is the play caller on that side of the ball. Outside of basically Russell Gage, Tajay Sharp, and Keith Smith, everybody else was drafted in the first 3 rounds of the draft, and maybe a couple of guys drafted in round 4 or whatever the case may be. But I'm going to continue to stress on this podcast, that we're going to sit here and talk about these top 100 or so talents that they're certainly underachieving. By all means, 100% that several of these guys are not performing up to the level that we should and would have come to expect. But the issue that the Falcons going to have to deal with is that they're going to wind up replacing these top 100 talents with more top 100 talents. And if Arthur Smith isn't getting more out of this group of guys, why would you expect him to get more out of the next group of guys? I feel like I'm taking crazy pills when I say stuff like this, but like, we know that this defense needs a huge talent infusion. We need to invest resources in this defense, which primarily manifests itself in free agent dollars and premium guaranteed big contracts and or first and second round picks, where the top notch talent is, right? And you're not going to hear, again, any argument for me. If anybody's sitting here saying we need to use our first 2 or 3 picks of this draft on defense, you're not going to hear me say, oh no, we shouldn't do that. If you're asking me, will the Falcons do that? I don't think they will. I think at least one of those guys is going to be an offensive player, probably a quarterback, but we'll see. Maybe a running back. We'll see. But in terms of whether the Falcons should do that, like, again, I'm not going to hear any complaints from me about that plan, but that's going to leave you for drafting offensive players, those skill positions, because we do know that we have holes on that side of the ball as well in the 3rd and 4th and 5th round, where we already have a bunch of 3rd and 4th and 5th round guys on the offensive side of the ball that allegedly lack talent. So why are you going to think the new 3rd, 4th, and 5th round picks are going to be better than the old 3rd, 4th, 5th round picks? Why do you think Arthur Smith's going to magically figure it out with this group of 3rd, 4th, and 5th round picks versus the previous group of 3rd, 4th, and 5th round picks? This is the point I'm trying to make, guys. Right? You're looking at the Mike Davises, the Jalen Mayfields, the Matt Hennessy's, the Wayne Gallmans, the Russell Gages, the Tajay Sharps, the Olamide Zaccheaus, Quadri Olison type of players that we're asking to play prominent roles currently on the roster. And you can even throw in a Caleb McGarry or Hayden Hurst, because they were 1st round picks that, at least in my opinion, probably should have been 3rd round picks based off of their talent levels, and it's like the criticism I have of Arthur Smith is not because I think Arthur Smith is a bad coach. And like, again, people keep trying to straw man this argument of me saying, oh, Arthur Smith is a bad coach. No, I think he's done some very questionable job, performances in several games this year, but it doesn't necessarily mean, oh, he's a terrible coach because he made, 2 or 3 bad play calls or he mismanaged the clock or whatever the case may be. It's not that I think Arthur Smith is a bad coach. What I'm trying to sit here and stress to folks is that I think Arthur Smith has to be a better coach than what he has currently shown himself to be if this Falcons team is going to overcome the obstacles that they need to overcome in the coming years to get back to a level of success that we all can sit here and be proud of, right? He has to do a better job of elevating the quote unquote untalented players that his roster is full of, particularly on the offensive side of the ball. And I use air quotes because, again, we're still talking about second, third, and fourth round picks for the most part, which, most people would not argue are untalented players, particularly when you compare it to a team like the Lions, who, as I mentioned on Sunday, had a whole bunch of undrafted players starting for them on Sunday. Like, when we're talking about an untalented team, that's what we're talking about. And people that are putting the Falcons in that same conversation, it's kind of ridiculous to me. Like, Russell Gage is a great example of this, a player that has been elevated, particularly over the last 6 weeks. You look at the first 9 games of the season, and Russell Gage missed 3 of them due to injury, and then 3 others that he was blanked in, or in the first 9 weeks of the season. So the first 8 games of the season, he missed 3 to injury, and he had 0 catches in 3 others. So he was a non-factor for the first 2 months of the year. But you look at the last 6 weeks of the season, looking at some of his metrics, he's top 10 in yards among all wide receivers in the NFL over the last 6 weeks combined. He's top 10 in Pro Football Focus's yards per route run metric, right? He's averaging 72 yards per game or whatever the case may be, which is basically what Stephon Diggs and CeeDee Lamb have been averaging over the entire season. Now, I'm not saying Russell Gage is on that level as a football player, but he's been a player that has been elevated as a quote unquote day 3 talent, is starting to perform like at least a 3rd or 4th round talent. Like, Diggs was a 5th round pick or whatever the case may be. Like what you would, Cooper Kupp was a 3rd round pick. Maybe he's not on Cooper Kupp's level, but you know what I'm saying? Like, he's playing at a level that you would expect, a 6th round pick. He's playing like a 3rd round pick or whatever, what you would expect out of a 3rd round type of receiver. He's a great example of a player that has been elevated. You can even argue players like, Mike Davis and Olamide Zaccheaus over the last month have been guys that have been a lot more efficient on their limited workloads over the last, 4 or so games than they were earlier in the season when they had much bigger roles. So these are examples of players to me that you can sit here and argue, okay, if we're talking about Arthur Smith doing a good job, like these are the examples that we should use, not, oh, we've won 7 games with a bottom shelf roster, because that to me is basically BS, man. Like, they don't have a bottom shelf roster, guys. The Lions have a bottom shelf roster. If you want to praise Arthur Smith, guys, praise him for, like we're now seeing over the last, 4 to 6 weeks, some of these mid-round talents having their game elevated. We've gotten a good game from Jalen Mayfield. Tajay Sharp hasn't necessarily been producing as much, but if we're getting more from Quadri Olison over the, these are examples of what I'm talking about. Some of these players that these mid-round and late-round talents, seeing these guys contribute on a much more regular basis in positive ways, are great examples of maybe Arthur Smith is actually doing the thing that he needs to do in the future, and with different 3rd and 4th and 5th round talents, instead of having to wait 10 weeks of the season before you get that, maybe we can get that in week 1 of the 2022 season. But like, getting back to the last point I'll make is, like, the Falcons beat the Lions because they are way more talented than the Lions, right? And so this is why I give so much pushback on this narrative of the Falcons lack talent, because there's actual teams out there that truly lack talent. And you saw that on Sunday against the Lions. Like, the Lions outplayed the Falcons in most statistical categories. They had more first downs, more yards, rushing yards, passing yards. They were better in short yardage. They generated more pressure on the quarterback. The only things that the Falcons did better than the Lions is they didn't get penalized as much, because the Lions had a whole bunch of false starts, and they were better in the red zone. Like, the reason why the Falcons won that game, despite basically the argument I'm making, saying that they got outplayed in like 75% of the categories that you would utilize to tell who actually outplayed them, is because the Falcons have significantly better talent than the Falcons. So when you're sitting here trying to lump the Falcons and the Lions into the same category of team, like, the reason why they beat the Jaguars is because the Falcons have significantly more talent than the Jaguars do. And so, like, when we talk about, the Falcons are, the best of the bad teams, yeah, but there is a gap between like the bottom 3 or 4 teams in the league, teams like Jacksonville, teams like Detroit, teams like Houston, teams like the Jets, than where the Falcons are. And trying to throw them into that same group of teams and be like, they're just like marginally better than that. No, the reason why they're beating those teams is because they're significantly more talented. Now, we can say that, and again, this is part of the conversation surrounding Arthur Smith, is if he was doing a better job, you would see that displayed on a more consistent basis, that the gap wouldn't be as close as it is. But that's what I mean, guys, where I sit here and I go like, people are trying to sit here and act like the Falcons are this untalented roster, and I just go like, what are you guys looking at? There's a whole bunch of first and second and third round picks, and we're sitting here acting like we got Division III, undrafted free agents starting games for us, like the Lions did on Sunday. I'll never understand it, but I will probably save that rant for another day because I'm sure it's going to come up once again, particularly against Buffalo, because again, anytime the Falcons play a really good team and they get blown out, it's because we lack talent. It's not because the Falcons were poorly coached or whatever the case may be. That's kind of what good coaching is. You elevate the talent that you have. But this is kind of the point I'm trying to make, is like, that's what we need to be scrutinizing Arthur Smith more. Is he elevating talent? And there are examples like Russell Gage. There are, examples like Mike Davis and Alameda Zacchaeus in recent weeks where you can sit here and say, yeah, he is starting to elevate the talent. We just need to see more of it moving forward so that this team can look like a more talented team than the popular perception is. That's the point I want to make. So that's where we'll leave it, guys. Of course, make sure you check out Locked On Bets, another one recommendation for your second listen. Of course, Locked On Bets, free and available in a variety of podcasts. It's giving you all the tips that you need to make your bets on, the upcoming college playoffs, as well as the ongoing bowl season, in addition to the NFL, NBA, hockey, all that stuff. Handicapping expert Lee Sterling always has you covered on all the sports. And you can, of course, check out Locked On Bets on a variety of podcast platforms. And the last thing I'll say is, guys, RIP to John Madden. I found out, right before I jumped on and recorded this, that he had passed unexpectedly on Tuesday. And, John Madden, for millennials like me, even geriatric millennials like myself, our connection to him is primarily through him being one of the great broadcasters of all time. And that led to him being, part of this, what the most popular sports video game franchise of all time, and having that as his name. And so, for people, under the age of 40, that's how we know John Madden. That's how we connect with John Madden. But for me personally, and again, I'm not old enough to truly experience this, but, his time as a coach for the Raiders, in the 60s and 70s is another thing that is a underwritten part of John Madden's legacy. Growing up in a household of a father that was a big time Steelers fan, and was a Steelers fan during the height of that dynasty in the 70s and whatnot, and their biggest rival being the John Madden and Ken Stabler led Raiders teams, and sort of hearing those stories and really buying in as a young football fan into the whole Raiders mystique. It's always, I have a soft spot. That my former co-host Alan Circa always gives me a hard time for. I always had a soft spot for the Raiders, even during the early part of the century where they were one of the worst teams in the league. And I was always like, oh, the Raiders! I can't wait till the Raiders come back. But that Raiders mystique that John Madden sort of presided over, and it was implemented by Al Davis, has always been a thing that I've always been fascinated by. And I know they had the Madden documentary that aired a couple of days ago. I didn't get the chance to watch it live, but I'll see if I can catch it to go in deep depth on that. So it's just one of those things that just a personal connection with John Madden beyond just boom in the booth and in the video game and whatnot, that I know most people, particularly of my generation and younger, connect with him with. So just something to think about, to also appreciate John Madden for those 70s Raiders were a very special team and a very unique team. The kind of the bad boys of the NFL. Similar to, I guess, the Pistons in the 80s and early 90s or whatever the case may be, but like better because they won multiple Super Bowls or whatever the case may be. So no offense to the Pistons, but like a similar sort of mystique. I guess probably hated quite a bit, but there's enough time passed that they're kind of, at least from my perspective, appreciated to a certain degree. So just wanted to add that. Rest in peace, John Madden. You will be missed, and your legacy is immense beyond just the video game and the broadcast is the larger point I want to make. So that's going to do it for us, guys. If you want to send in questions for a potential future Q&A that probably will come on Friday, by all means, you can do so by hitting me up on Twitter at Locked On Falcons, on Facebook at Locked On Falcons. You can send an email to lockedonfalcons@mail.com, or you can leave a comment here on the Locked On Falcons YouTube channel. When you do, make sure you subscribe, make sure you hit that like, and again, of course, leave that comment. So that will do it for us, guys. Of course, tomorrow will be a crossover Thursday where I will be joined by the Locked On Bills host, Joe Marino, to preview this upcoming Week 17 matchup that is not the final game of the season, thanks to the 17-game season. That's going to be weird to wrap my head around. Still haven't wrapped my head around it, but that's on deck for us tomorrow on Locked On Falcons. Appreciate it. Till then.